Hello and welcome to the Better You podcast, sponsored by Lamco Wellness. We are joined by Ali Bailey and Ravi Patani, as well as Dr. Amy Asher, who has a very storied and interesting career to share with us. And we're going to be talking about uh, career uh, career difficulties and psychological fit with placement of therapists. I'll kick it over to you, Amy, to introduce yourself.
Mm, Hi, I'm Amy Asher. I'm recently a doctor of clinical psychology, and I've got a little bit of a long career. I'm a retired veteran from 30 years, and then went on to, I've also been a civil service, federal employee, went on to work with the FBI, and decided to go back to school. So now this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it keeps changing, evolving more and more each month. So just wanted to give some highlights on how things are similar in the diagnosis or the names that you hear, or also how they differ. Um, and that's what I hope to go through today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we wanted to talk about uh, the impact of the psychological impact and stress for employees in tactical and high stress situations like working for the FBI, and what that looks like, and also what the culture of that type of environment looks like.
Um, well, those are all good questions. I'll start off with it looks like nothing you've ever seen before. It's probably the good answer for it. You think you're prepared and you're trained well and you know all the mechanics of it. The actual experience is what um, is challenging for folks. It doesn't affect everybody the same way, and it may not affect many people at all. It will um, come out in various ways. It may come out in 2 to 3 months or 2 to 3 years, even more. Uh, and well, how it impacts is not only the person themselves, because you try to compartmentalize, but it also affects the families and the children and your fellow workers. And sometimes the individual themselves are the last to see it. They think they're dealing with it.
I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go
No,
ahead.
no, I was just wondering, do you,
Yeah.
okay.
I think that's how mental health always works. The people most responsible for it, or most impacted by it, are the last to know, and it's only after it has spilled over into everyone else around them, that they kind of pick up on it and action it. I was having a discussion today about how the lag time between noticing that you may need some mental health help and actually getting in front of a therapist uh, is on average like 11 years, which I think is just absolutely insane. And that, like, in thinking in terms of in the military, and also in terms of being in the FBI, there is kind of this idea of, you have to be strong, and you need to shrug off injury and fatigue. At least that's my understanding of it. I'm way on the outside of things. But there's also, my grandpa was in the military his whole career, and he used to talk about the reason that you try to be your best isn't because, like, long term, isn't because of the the ideals or your country or your commanding officer. It's because of the people next to you in the position. Like, you have a responsibility to be your best self for them. How does I'm really interested in kind of the difference between those two ideals, and how it kind of forms into the culture, uh, in both the military and FBI, as far as you're allowed to talk about it anyway.
Um, it really does. It's kind of a woven tapestry it goes through. And I'll just go real quickly on how it's evolved and how we respond. as first responders to situations or tragedies or events has changed from back in the uh, Civil War days where you met head on, musket to musket, to continuing on to World War I, World War II, and they saw trauma. And now it's evolved more because of the technology. And I'll just throw out an example. Wherever you are, it could be in a different state, researching a case, or it could be overseas. Now we have FaceTime or Zoom, and just that impact going back to the individual. So the stigma, you're still spot on after all these years. You have to be don't let them see you sweat. We use the phrase, "Are you hurt or are you injured?" And if you can still get up and move, you're just hurt. Um, and if you're injured, you take care of the person next to you. Um, when you're actually in those situations, it comes off like you realize you're doing things that you thought I would never do that. Um, as simple as reaching down, helping somebody, and carrying them to a safe place. We always think how we would respond, but where it meets and what you actually do is becomes part of the larger picture, as you were talking about taking care of the person next to you. And also, you may not realize it's actual stress. You're just doing what you were trained, or doing what I'm supposed to do, until months, years later. Uh, you're talking about 11 years. By that time, some people go, "Oh, that was so long ago. It didn't really bother me." Um, Now everything's evolved more with trauma, and it is a type of trauma.
Mhm.
People have them from when they're a child, or they can have them from an event, or even a living situation. They go into both the military and um, the I'll just call them other first responders, along the FBI, um, DEA agents, and all those go into situations that they never thought they would experience, and it'll tell you they hope they can't unsee it and they can't undo it. Um, but it's always there, a part of it, a part of what your fiber, because you now have seen some of the worst sides of humanity, um, I'll say.
Yeah.
And on the military side, we also, with Desert Shield and Storm, started activating the Guard and the Reserve. And citizen soldiers have jobs, bankers, lawyers, everything on the outside. So now they're being called up to go into situations that isn't um, the danger, or rather the confrontations that they're meeting isn't an everyday thing. Um, and I would phrase it to, so what do they do with that? What do they do with it? Um, in the FBI, you can't go home and talk about it. Uh, in fact, you can't even talk to your friends about it. So you keep it inside. You bottle it up, which just increases the stress or the trauma. And uh, that's where the compartmentalization comes in. And for some folks, it can happen for years. The stigma doesn't help with that. Those people still today will make the comment, "Did you see any action?" Or "Did you kill anybody?" Which is uh, probably not the best questions, but they don't know. You know what you see on TV,
Yeah.
and um, the technology today is not as much hand to hand. Uh, it can be for drones. The operators are actually back in the United States, while the
Mhm.
drone activity is happening in a different country. The pilot, you have to be trained, will get up and then they go to their child's soccer game or basketball game. So what do they do with that stuff? Or they just solve, or they drop bombs?
Yeah.
There's a people that all they do is IT or X-rays or the medical field, and they're there physically and mentally and emotionally as well. Also, um, they might not have carried a, uh, I won't say minimalize it to being in combat, but their service is just as critical and impactful as what they're doing.
Oh yeah.
Particularly, it's part of that bigger picture of the people next to you. Um, and I've worked with those that have trauma just from the event of, well, I didn't go anywhere, I stayed home. They they were training people on the computers. They were teaching them how to protect, and what to do with the computers when they fall apart, because you're not really at a place where you can go to the electronics store. Um, so that's critical to the mission as well. But yet
Yeah.
their brain, the first thing you think of, oh well, it's not as scary or it's not as important, and they don't feel I've talked to some that didn't feel worthy of. I don't. Oh, I didn't do anything. Even when they say thank you for your service,
Mm.
we don't.
So
We don't know what to say. Do it.
I,
Yeah.
it's in anything, like, in my opinion, in anything, no matter how personalized the endeavor is, there's always a team that's part of it. um, and I think that often gets overlooked. um, the other day I was reading something that defined trauma as any situation where that you don't like, that you have zero control over the outcome of. And when we talk about, I really like the definition, because I think when we talk about trauma, we tend to think of trauma as like, oh, this horrible thing, like I was in action, I saw violence was committed upon me, whatever. um but that's not necessarily what traumatizes people. Uh, some people are incredibly comfortable with violence, and that doesn't register with them as much as going to get surgery or something like that. Um, but I I did want to kind of highlight that what you were bringing up about this idea of like, no, the trauma hits everybody. It doesn't it's not exclusive to 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 just agents or combat mission personnel. Um, I don't know if Ali, you had anything to contribute with that, because I
I
saw you kind of.
I did. I was unmuting and I'm like, do I want to raise my hand? But, I didn't want to interrupt. And I think that the work that you have done is absolutely amazing. And I know with, specific areas in frontline and clinical work, we're not able to disclose a lot of details, due to some guidelines, but also for, I say, the HIPAA, part of it. But some things, a few things that resonated with me, and I have a history not just working with, different populations and individual and group care, but I also have over 4 years of working in crisis intervention. And when you said that sometimes people would have come to you and said, thank you for your service, it's one of those things where you're just kind of, at least for myself, when people have said that to me, I just kind of stand there and I'm like, well, what do I say back? Because for me, it's not just a job. You're passionate about what you do. Certainly, things that you see, hear, witness, you will never unsee. I always say there's certain situations and stories that will forever be engraved in my soul. Will always be carried with me, but we're learning experiences. And sometimes people, and I'm sure you've also gotten questions like this, but sometimes people have asked me in roles that I have done, how did you, think through those situations, or how did you handle it? And it's not an easy answer. And what I mean by that is, sometimes you're, at least in previous roles I've had, de-escalating someone who's suicidal, that's homicidal, in that crisis work. So you are the front face of saving someone, or in a situation where, again, these aren't the common scenarios where someone's coming in to an office for care, signing on to a telelink. Um, so it's almost like at least how I feel, is we desensitize ourselves to conform to that role, right? But we're still humans behind the role that we choose, and also we're passionate about helping others, we're empathetic, we're compassionate, and we want the best for others, and for what we're doing in the roles that we take over. So when you said a lot of those things, I was just like, wow, it doesn't just fulfill working for, I say, law enforcement, but it kind of goes back to the other frontline, responding roles that one may have.
That's spot on. I it's it's actually a humble honor, I guess to say, because particularly when people entrust to you, um, a secret or whatever they've held for 15 or more years. And it's
Yes.
so fragile and gentle. What um, a humble honor. I mean, it's uh, tragic, but it's all about the connection, where
Yes.
they can trust you. And sometimes I know it's easy to get in our head and think about, well, what technique? Sometimes it's just being present, um, to realize that they can, um, someday share. And the most cleansing, I think, for some individuals were just to say, I was scared. And because you're not supposed to say that, you're trained, and um, it's scary. Uh, Fireworks, I don't enjoy those, but if I don't see where the sound's coming from, and several people have not mentioned their connection with that. And it can also be, as they talk about PTSD, things or stories you had people that work with you alongside, or their family that experienced something, and the power of you couldn't do enough, or you couldn't um, save it. Those are debilitating, and it can reach where sometimes I know, um, the tendency to want to dig deeper to get to the root of the issue. Um, it'll come, but it's just to be sensitive to it. Um, I will say the response I've learned to start giving, and felt really funny, is just somebody says thank you for. I just say you're worth it, um, to the
That's a
folks,
good
because
response.
Thank
as
you.
just who we are, and as people, humankind, whether it be the country or even political debates, but it's just you're worth it, to do all we can do. And I, um, it's a bigger picture than ourselves, and I believe it's we're in this field, or if you're a first responder or clinical, is always the you're part of a bigger entity than just, who you are, and that's where you get to see the life where it comes um, to highlight, which now has even come, that's, with as far as the technology, and I touched on that. The DSM has even come out to say that if it's a prolonged exposure to stressful events, and that means you could be monitoring a computer to, um, on the dark web or something, that prolonged event, um, you may say, "Oh, that doesn't bother me." Um, it'll get to you. So I'm grateful that we've progressed far enough to realize that it impacts everybody, even outside of gender. We think, oh, well, you're a man, you're not supposed to do that. Um, no, and there are some, um, women that I worked with that were, I mean, just everybody, when it comes to their core, um, they're there, and they have it to do to offer what they can. Even the recruiters, suicide has gone up tremendously in the FBI and with, the veterans. We hear about that a lot. The recruiters, they bring them in, and we cradle to grave from when they first raise their hand to when, and experiences sometimes when they've, committed suicide, and that impacts it tremendously. Needless to say,
Yeah. Yeah. And
brought them
if I,
into the line of work.
oh, I didn't want to cut you off. Go
No, no, go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, I'm
Um,
done.
well, something I was going to say, and I know you had brought up our wonderful veterans, and something that I read a long time ago. I'm someone who loves quotes. I will scroll for hours on my phone when I'm supposed to be asleep, to read these quotes in different research articles. But a quote that stood out to me was that the scariest thing I've ever had to do or have done is ask for help. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, whether it's the common teenager who's, concerned about an exam later in their week, or the veteran who is struggling, especially with, this most recent weekend, being the holiday fourth. I know, as you mentioned, fireworks, things, of that nature being very triggering. I mean, there are so many different resources available to people for acute crisis. And, it comes up to me, at least having worked in crisis intervention. I know that 988, the national 911 for mental health, they offer a veteran specific line. So you're able to connect with a crisis counselor 24/7 by chat, call, or text. And I think what would be also beneficial is if we put that in our description here, just so if anyone's out there listening that needs that support. 988 doesn't just, offer specific lines to the veterans until next week on the 17th. They're also going to be offering the LGBTQ plus line that will be expiring at 11:59 p.m. And then they also offer the regular 24-hour support, again, through call, chat, or text. So, there's a lot of different resources that can be accessible, of course, that are confidential without, concern for breaking confidentiality, if, of course, someone's not a harm to themselves or others. But I always like to mention that, especially when topics come up like this, because, again, someone may be listening that might be afraid to take that next step of contacting a therapist or not know kind of where to start. So, those resources not just can help in the moment, but can, also progress and give you referrals and resources for continued help. So, again, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to
No,
add that.
no, and that is so relevant, I think, to what we're talking about, as well as the fear of just approaching somebody. Um, I've, People often go many miles just to see a therapist if they do take that first step, so that way it doesn't get back the fear of losing their job, no longer having their clearance, um, not able to carry a weapon is that's care for their family now. I mean, it can go on down. So the fear of anybody knowing, and it even goes to different shades as far as if they have a teenager struggling or another family member with an addiction, that could impact their security clearance or ability to carry a weapon. Um, so just to know that it's okay and where there are different avenues to go for help. Um, it, if nothing else, it'll help the friends that they see. Those are the best. I'll call them front line, but they are the best as far as your friends are going to be the ones that notice something's a little off, and they'll tell you. They're a true friend, more than before you'll go to your boss.
On that note,
Oh,
Ali and Amy, just like what are the biggest myths that you guys have seen that people like are afraid from, like from seeking mental health, like just or healthcare in general, that you can share with everyone?
And when you say like a myth, can you clarify that just a little bit more? Only
Yeah,
because well, go ahead.
no, no, in a sense of it's a barrier in their mind where some type of vulnerability, or they're afraid because they've seen other people are scared
Mhm.
to seek out mental health care. So this is a general topic of conversation where if you have seen in people's like why they're afraid to come to you, or just go to anyone else in general.
I think, and not so much a myth, but a belief, I guess, right, by the
Mhm.
person
Belief.
themselves. But um, especially for teens that I have worked with over the years. I come forward, I'm going to be rejected. Others are going to reject me for coming out, or bully me if this becomes known that I asked for help. I'm going to have safety concerns by my parent or guardian. There's a lot of things, behind the scenes. I mean, we can sit face to face and have discussions. We can be talking over another platform. We could be doing an audio call. But again, we don't know what's happening behind those virtual or closed doors of that person's life. So, we take the words and the accountability, I guess, from that person of what they disclose to us, taking that understanding to know um, what's going on. And of course, we never want to interrogate the person or make them feel continued shame, but we want them to feel heard. And I think that's the most important thing.
Uh, that and to try to steer away from discounting. Uh, I'll take EAP, which is a great service that can be offered, but um, there are situations where the individual may have a concern, and to discount it by saying, "Oh, they're not going to do that. Oh, your boss isn't going to do that." We don't, their experiences are their reality right now, and not even looking at it as trauma. They're looking at it from a different lens, so to speak. So just the fact that they've, as I would say to the VA when they walk in that door, is the bravest thing they um, could have done, because their mind's telling them you're going to be laughed at, you're going to be kicked out, you're going to be sent down to that hallway that you never come back. That was one of the jokes. Don't turn there, because of the fear of it is so horrendous. Um, how can you be a part of this? And that prevents them from even getting the care they while it's offered, to seek it or the help. And with the other services we were talking about, FBI, they can't, if they're an active agent or support employees, uh, they you try not to mention where you work for the sake of it brings on more questions from people, um, and that can be very difficult to the for the client. Just I would say learning how to respect that, and um, they know how to tell or share what they need, um, and their trust in the whole confidentiality will be a little shaken, um, per se.
Yeah.
For what they're doing. And I mentioned the support as well, because in the day of this part on TV is true. What they see as far as the analyst and the computer putting the things together, which may lead in the right direction. However, the cases often go on to 10 or 15 years, um, and you don't necessarily get to see the outcome, nor do you have any power over the outcome when it hits the legal system. And that is just simply to say the expectations that you may have had dedicating years of your life has all of a sudden shifted in a different way, which leads to that moral injury part. That what do they do with that, or how do
Yeah.
they even express it?
Yeah. And
So
like earlier, I know we were talking about like feeling as though we're holding things in a lot, right? And like you mentioned, there's some cases that probably could go on for quite a long time, and holding things in, what we've seen, what we've heard, what we've experienced firsthand, secondhand, from reading things, watching things, and that can be experienced amongst any frontline clinical or other roles or experiences in one's life. um, but as you mentioned, sometimes we don't always know the outcome, but we're expected in specific roles, right, or told that sometimes we won't know the outcome, or we're not ever going to find out the outcome, and that's okay, right? But I know morally, we want to know or have closure, right? So you also mentioned about when there's been times one sought clinical assistance, right? And again, there's those feelings of doom, like if I go in here, am I going to be terminated? Am I going to have an issue? I'm wondering what that looks like in terms of building the client therapist relationship, because again, there's those concerns for confidentiality. And I'm sure that when it comes to like assessing as a clinician, right, like are you in harm's way in certain jobs or roles? We could be, right, not just physically but psychologically. So speaking on that, if you can share, what would be some ways of a person working a frontline type of a job going for assistance? Like, what would that look like in terms of disclosure? Like, I'm unable to share where I work, but I am seeking help. Is that kind of what we're hearing?
that's kind of that is exactly what you're hearing. And
Okay,
if it once the relationship becomes one of trust, they you can shift to hypotheticals, and I say that,
gotcha.
but you can always say that. Well, let's say, and then they can make up a job, because they're not. We're they're, anyone's not going to tell you what they're actually working on or what they're doing, for the fear of they'll try to. The therapist is going to try to put me that. As far as the building trust, I think what I've experienced is that just being respectful of the person, just to ask them where they want to sit. That may sound simple, but you're not going to have your back to the door. I mean, as the client,
Yeah.
or respecting when it gets real quiet, um, because it's you could when the quiet time is actually a very insightful time for you as a therapist, because they're either processing, rewording it in their head, or there's something going on there. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes, we don't feel comfortable in quiet, but as the client themselves realize they can trust you, and they may not use insurance. I know veterans that will not use TRICARE probably in the recent 6 months because they're fearful that somebody will go in there and find out. So they have to find places that they can afford and also pay to get the service. Um, so the probing questions, while you may want to know, as again to help them, they will help find a way to communicate with you, and that's just being accepting of it. If I know that sounds so broad and don't mean to condescending, but sometimes if they talk about, well, let's say you lived on a farm, and you're kind of going, where are we going with this? But you understand that
Yeah.
that's just what they could grab onto right then,
Yeah.
and try to describe it. So it's challenging. As you said, you've worked with the veterans and it sounds like the LGBT and the teenagers, and um, everything's running through the mind a mile a minute. Um, it
Yeah.
it doesn't have a name, let's put it that way. It doesn't have a name yet, what they're feeling.
Right, right. And it's only up to, like you said, the client or the person in the shoes of looking for help, help seeker that can define what a crisis is or what help they're seeking. And I think just using the hypotheticals versus interrogating, right? Because as a helper, we want to help to solve the problem, but we can't always jump
Right.
to that third step. It takes that time to build the rapport. So making sure that person's comfortable, like you said, just starting, where would you like to sit? Where's most comfortable for you? What's a safe space for you? Then transitioning over to, okay, what are some scenarios that we can talk about that are a little bit, relatable. However, we're not touching directly on a subject. And I think that's the most important thing, like, and especially also what you were saying is the self-discovery of the client, right? Like we're the guide in the mental health field as a provider, but we're walking alongside the client on their path to whatever that wellness journey looks like for them. So, with them disclosing, again, up to them, whatever they choose to disclose, we're ensuring their safety. We're just along for that walk on the trail. They want to take 5 steps forward that session. We take 5 steps forward. Next session, they want to take a step back. We take a step back with them. And meeting the person where they are, I think, is the underwritten essential quality of a therapist that's very important because yes, we can go through many different hands-on continuing education trainings, but the ability to adapt to one's needs specific to every client or person you interact with is very crucial for that continued rapport and continuing that work with the client because we never want to overstep our boundary ethically, but we also never want to overstep and make the person say, I'm just not going to call back. I'm not going to show up for that session
Mhm.
because then we wonder as a provider, like, did I do something wrong? You know, but we want that person to feel like they can go and get help.
And that's so right when they're looking at it, and the tendency to want to help them or give them the answers, um, it can we don't know, and I can, as we all know, they've all second guessed themselves or thought of, which the spiral of what should I've done, what could I do, to even as that far as not assuming I don't know what I don't know, and to assume that, oh, everybody's a soldier. Well, now you've just really irritated the Air Force and the Marines because they don't call themselves soldiers. And I had that experience with children that are 10 years older. They know if their mommy or daddy is a airman or fly planes or wherever they're at. But the minute you say, army because everything falls under the, you think it's the army. You see the expression on that little kid's face, like you don't know anything, um, because that's not what they do. So it's just, you can't necessarily use the vernacular. You can try. I've tried 30 years to learn all the acronyms and vernacular, but I've learned just to say, okay, tell me what you want. Um, or if I find out I slip on a word, they're a lot more interested in helping educate me. And again, it's just like a different culture altogether. We can't assume we know the different cultures thoroughly. And uh, that's part of that building trust. You're right. And to help them along that journey and to help them where they may need to get additional support, whether it be if you're not trained in EMDR or brain spotting or different areas that could be really beneficial to them. Um, what were any other?
Ali, in the sense of being a intake coordinator for Lamco, and seeing what you just said in regards to the comfortable level you want everyone to feel right in the beginning process.
Yes.
Um, what would you say how Lamco, what the procedure is for Lamco, the process is for Lamco, if certain people don't feel comfortable when they're first assigned to the clinician? What would be the next step for them? How would they go? How does Lamco help with that?
Sure. So yes, in my current role as an intake coordinator, again, and I think it just goes with my years of having worked in crisis management and also with clients on their own, right? You develop a certain type of a language that helps to meet where they are. And of course, sometimes I have people where I can understand exactly what they're sharing with me. And when I say that, sometimes things can get very emotional. One may start to become very angered, very sad, very distraught. So, again, meeting the person where they are is important. So, in terms of, and I don't like to use the word assessment, right? Because that kind of puts a stigma on what, an intake questionnaire is. Um, I rather would say that it's more of a conversation just to learn a little bit more about the person. I always disclose that, yes, while I am the front face or the person who's reaching out specifically to you for this customized, you know, free intake session, doesn't take long. It's 10 to 15 minutes, again, depending on the severity of what the person wants to share or doesn't want to share. But I let them know it's a safe space, and the more information I gather from them, the more information I'll be able to pass on to that clinician and know how to pair them with a clinician. To get to your question, though, especially post intake and pairing them with a clinician, right? The person, again, they have the right when on the phone with me to say, I mean, of course, there's certain questions that I do say are mandated to be answered of, suicidal, homicidal ideation, harm to self, things like that. Because again, we're assessing the level of safety for the person and if they are eligible for that type of care, telehealth care through LAMCO. Um, what goes next is if that person does not feel a connection with their therapist, we don't want them to fall off, right? We don't want them to discontinue because they didn't like, and I'm just going to throw an example, the background of the therapist in their office. Something bothered them, or, it could be, and it's up to, depending on the situation, right? Like if they reach out and, like that scenario I just said, the clock in the background triggers me. Maybe it's a conversation we have with that therapist because maybe that's the only thing that's causing a disruption for the type of service being provided. But there are continued steps, perhaps trying to pair them with someone else. But I think the most crucial part of being an intake coordinator, again, it's up to the person of how much or how little they want to tell me, as long as I know that they're safe, and also just a lot of the presenting concerns they come in with. I then, though, if somebody is coming in with anxiety symptoms, I would like to place them with a therapist with more of a cognitive behavioral background, or a background where we're challenging the negative thought processes and replacing them with more positive ones. We're able to manage that level of care. So I hope that answers your question. But there's a lot of different opportunities. But again, I think it's very important from that initial outreach to build that rapport so that person does feel comfortable either telling me or the therapist that they're paired with that, hey, this just isn't working out. Is there someone else that can take over?
So I wanted to circle way back to something that Amy brought up about this idea of, are you hurt or are you injured? And which I've heard that before too when I was playing sports. You know, hurt or injured. If you can get out there, you can like get out there. Um, but I think it gets very nuanced with mental health care, because like if I'm injured, I know I'm injured right away because I'm trying to do something and I can't do it. When like if you're injured mentally, it's it's not the same. You might not know it right away because the injury, and I've seen it happen, and I'm sure both of you can attest to this. The injury could be preventing somebody from recognizing what the injury is preventing them from doing, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
And what does what do the early warning signs of mental injury look like? Do what can we do as essentially as lay people trying to help these people get back to their best self, or become their best self? Because I think uh, we all on some level know somebody who you're like, oh, you could use some therapy, but they're very resistant to it, or they're like, no, I'm fine, or whatever. Like, what does that look like? I went really all over the place with that. So if you need to condense what I said in any way, please feel free to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of the warning signs, and I believe that Amy had mentioned it earlier, is, a lot of times we don't recognize it ourselves when we're going through or struggling through a difficult time. It's unconscious for us, but maybe our behaviors are a little bit different. Our, um, you know, outreach to people is different. I know some people, even in experiences that I've had, where if I've had a very long week, normally I am the texter. I call the same friends. I have a little circle of friends I call from out of state. And if I don't call them for a couple days on end, they reach out to me and poke me and say, hey, like, where are you? What's up? They'll send me those iMessages where it's like the big text that like slaps on your screen and what's going on? Like, what, where are you? So, I think sometimes, and again, it just goes with any field, any situation, any experience one has, right? That, we might dissociate. We might kind of go back into our shell a little bit. We might not be as expressive as we want to be, but I think as others may notice it, and we also may notice us not being ourselves, that's when we kind of recognize, like, okay, like there's a problem. But then also could come those negative thoughts of there's nothing that can help me. There's nothing that can fix the situation. It's just a revolving cycle. So that's why I think preventative action is just very important. Like we said, when we feel hurt in a mental state, okay, I don't feel beyond repair, but I don't want to get to that next level. What can I do? Where can I go? Who can I talk to? And for some, unfortunately, it's very limited of those contacts that they have.
Yeah. Dr. Escher?
Um, I'm going to say ditto. No, to everything that you said, but it's also very much as far as they don't they don't have the words many times, and I've uh, particularly with adolescents or young kids, I said, okay, what is it you want me to know that you haven't told me? And they'll tell you. I mean, because it's there right in front of them, and just to help, they're gonna the things that I've worked with them and some adults and veterans and FBI, just the things that we may consider minimal, breathing, taking, um, and how helpful that is. And they're not going. I have yet to have one say it there in the office. They may try, but later they'll come back, maybe 2 weeks later, and go, you know what? Um, for one, I just said, if it's what so and so is doing, just turn around. And I did that and found something instead of just obsessing about it. And so it's a little. You never know what you're going to say on how it will reach out. And you're right. The friends, the family can just tell by your affect many times, even by the phone. Or I believe many people have the friend that they might not have talked to in a couple of years, and all of a sudden you pick up the phone and talk to them, and it's right back as far as that nurturing, caring thing that
Yes.
you hear, which is healing. And it's okay to actively do something. Um, we talk about self care, and that doesn't mean working it into your busy schedule so you can, okay, this 30 minutes I'm going to do my self care. I had to train myself that self care meant self care. Okay. Um, and sometimes just sharing with the client that it's not about um, their lack of cognitive ability to understand what self care is. It may be something very unique that they can do. And uh, again, when you see, um, and you've talked on this, alley several times about the when you see someone in pain and you can't fix it, um, or you don't really know what it is to fix, but you just life doesn't have to be that hard as it is. And I've practiced with clients to how do they can talk to their primary care doctor because he doesn't believe it. So we would do the empty chair trying to talk to each other, and just tell them point blank, you're not listening to me. While
Yeah.
that may not be in their verbiage, they can find a way to do it. But it's there'll be more roadblocks keeping them from reaching out. More reasons not to even pick up that phone or to tell somebody, yeah, I'm not doing okay. Um, to even know where to find help. And when you were talking about the intake, um, it is it would seem to be an intuitive thing. I've not had your job, but um, just listening to the person and that the fact that they picked up the phone
Yeah.
is a tremendous step.
Oh, yes.
Um, and you're right. I may be wearing the same sweater that they bought at Macy's or something, and that
Yeah.
is a trigger, or may have mannerisms that remind them of um, an aunt or uh, somebody that you don't know, and um, it's it, we don't know judging using my insides to judge somebody else's outsides um, doesn't isn't very effective, and but I can't exclude the fact that people do that. You judge your insides by someone else's outsides, and uh, the fact that they took a step in the first place is commendable.
Yes.
And finding them, and you're right to find where how they match up with the client, be it older, younger, male, female, um, whatever it is, we don't know, and have them tell you. I mean, you can't have them tell you, but to make it open enough where they can share that with you.
I feel like there's this, we were just talking about connecting to clients that maybe aren't as ready to connect or have some distance. And I feel like there's this idea of play the hand that you're dealt, that applies to everything, but I think it very much applies to mental health and to um, the clinical space, because I'm just assuming that any clinician would love to have a client that comes in and says, this is what's wrong with me, this is what I need to help with, this is exactly where everything is. But I don't do that. I've been in and out of therapy pretty much my whole life and try to and like have some good experiences with it. I still don't do that. I'm like, yeah, sure, okay, uh-huh. and it takes a little while for me to open up. And you know, there's this process that I think all clinicians see happening, and I've only just recently realized it happening after 20, 30 plus years of me being in therapy, of trying to get the client to the place where they're ready to do the work, or to have the conversations that need to be had.
Yeah.
um is there is there a point, and this is to both of you, but is there a point as clinicians where you kind of go, oh, this is the stage that we're at, this is the step that we're at here, here's the, or is it always just kind of it varies? In my head, it's the first, but I'm also inclined to believe that's probably not the case. It's more likely the second.
Well, I mean, I think that yes, as a clinician, and I still see private clients to this day, outside of my intake role. But something that I always say to my clients is, while we are, and I do frequent check-ins with them to see where they feel we're at, and I let them know, as far as our treatment plan reviews and things, where we are as a whole. Um, that yes, I come into our sessions with an agenda. I come in based on what we discussed last time, that, hey, maybe it's some coping skills we're going to review, or we're going to continue that rather more difficult topic that we were discussing last time. But I always say, whatever you're coming into session with takes precedent over my plan. I will certainly integrate and tailor my plan based on what you need. But hey, maybe one of my clients had a breakup, during the week prior, to us meeting again. Maybe it's um, something with job, or with, their living situation. So there's many factors under the umbrella of the unknown, right? And again, we only know what is being disclosed to us and what somebody's comfortability is. So therefore, we can only do as much as we can, as the provider. But again, knowing where our person is, ensuring that, we're documenting, we're listening, we're showing them that we are the professionals of who we are. Again, it keeps that good relationship with the person.
Um, and listening, but and just being present. There are
Yes.
sometimes, because as they, I've learned that there are common themes. Right, we come in with an agenda, but that oftentimes just goes out the window because a common theme will come up that they don't realize is there. Or mentioning, it'll come up later that, oh, they're actually going through a custody battle because they've just gone through a divorce, when they've been focusing on the person at work. Um, because it's easier to focus on the person at work, obviously, than something that's gripping them in the inside as far as the custody. But just listening to it, and um, for me, it's remembering or reminding to bring it back up, touch on it lightly without having to unwrap the whole box. Um, Sometimes it could be I get the doorknob confession as they reach the doorknob, and they'll go, "Oh, by the way," blah, blah, and it's like, well, that's a big thing. And to answer that, or ask them even, you mentioned last time, why that did something trigger that, or did it just come up, or was it one of those DoorDash things? Just go by and leave it on the doorstep. And I obviously I like to use humor to put them if they feel like they're on the hot seat, and that they can relate to. But also, and not into psychoanalysis, I'm not good at that, or dream interpretation. But if I've had one that there had family issues, in-laws and everywhere else, and they go, I keep having this dream. I don't know. I'm in the water and there's this rope pulling me, keeps pulling me back, and I'm trying to go the other way. But kind of sounds like a family, and they that they when they can make that connection with whatever it is, and if it's not right or on target, I find they'll correct me or say, no, it's more like quicksand, whatever it is. But if I have to practice being present, and then listening to the whole story, not just the words, um, and that can be, and people will leave sometimes because they don't like that. Um, you've made it a little bit uncomfortable, and I do the same thing with my therapist. I've um, always feel maintenance is a good thing as well, and figure out, oh, what am I going to talk about? Find something, but uh, being skilled enough to know that that's just the icing on it right now, as far as what's down below, and that's where the work gets done. And sometimes it's just finding it that's the work or the challenge, um,
Yeah.
than figuring it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dr. Asher.
Oh,
Sorry, Ali, go for it.
I was
That's
just
good.
going to piggyback really quickly to that because, a lot of people sometimes will say, as a mental health provider, or clinician, right? Like, what is your goal with a client, right? And it's hard to say because again, we're under guidelines where we can't say specifically what our goal is with one specific client. But I remember when I was in my grad program, one of my professors, I had 3 professors in my whole 3-year program, very knowledgeable man and wonderful, wonderful mentor. Really had a lot of great things to teach us in terms of not just clinical, but also how to manage it as a person, right? Because like we're kind of all the common theme here discussing is at the end of the day we are people who are giving care to others, who are reaching out and guiding them along the journey. But something he said is, we're in the business to put ourselves out of business, right? Like
Hmm.
there's many people who reach out for help, and yes, we want to help as many people as we can, but we also want to consider our self-care, our threshold of, okay, how much as a person can we also manage too without burnout. And I know we've discussed burnout on many different, occasions in other podcasts, but I just wanted to add that as well because the jobs we do are very important and, like Amy had said, honorable. Go
And
ahead, Ravi. I didn't want to interrupt.
yep.
No, no worries. I mean, this question it's basically for both of you guys. Dr. Asher, I love the word that you use, present. I just wanted to deep dive into what can someone do to help themselves to be in a present situation. What is an idea or a helpful a tip basically for a person to be in the present?
Um, from my experiences, observe what's going around you, and it could be simply, and this, I hope this doesn't come out as trivial, but opening the door for someone or just see who's in the lobby or the. I would often, when I go into a new environment, check out the cafeteria, get you a soda, just to talk to them, and um, that can easily set the. It gives me an idea of the affect or the climate, if it's going on, and if there's a person carrying that very guarded or shielded affect coming in, you I generally can recognize it or hear it from someone else, and even being in their space without and listening to them versus me thinking what I'm going to say next. I didn't realize how hard that would be until practicing it. Um, so that's what I was going to say: being present and with them.